Good morning, everyone. It's truly a pleasure to be here. I was first time here in 2013 as a PhD student, and it's wonderful to be back. I'm sorry we're doing a little bit of a switch up, but the presenter's plane got delayed, so I was happy to step in. So we're, breaking a little bit of the matrix. I also just came back from the Burning Man Festival, so if I forgot a few numbers, I have my laptop there and I'll be happy to look them up. So I apologize if I forget something. But we will talk also not about AI, but about peer review. And as this is the peer review conference, I hope you'll be able to switch your minds a little bit to the non-AI stuff. This is a study, an observational study on open peer review versus non-open peer reviews. And it's been done with the collaborators whose names you can barely see on the screen, but I would like to mention Elena here, who did this as part of her PhD. I am a research scholar at the Stanford University and of a Stanford program on research rigor and reproducibility in sport. And I'm also the chair of the peer review committee of the European Association of Science Editors. And so even though we did produce AI guidelines for peer reviewers and authors, this will not be work related to AI. Let me just see this one. I think, yes. As you know, sort of today, since 1960s, peer review has become the standard way that journals have operated when inviting external peer reviewers. But the proportion and the percentage of the journals that operate on open peer review is extremely low. Out of more than 100,000 journals that exist today, scholarly journals, only 0.1% use any type of open peer review, meaning either publishing peer review reports or disclosing names of reviewers. And yet it's already, since the first journals in the 19s and the BMC journals in 2001, where we had absolutely no evidence that single blind or single anonymous, as we're supposed to call them today, or double anonymous, are in any way more superior than open peer reviews. And so it was in 1999 that BMJ editor Richard Smith at the time already said, we have no evidence that open peer review does not produce the same results. So we're going to switch to open peer review because of ethical reasons, because we want to increase the transparency of the publication process. And we want this to be a discussion of how science is actually done. And so this study that I'm going to present is about that. It's trying to give a little bit more evidence about what open peer review does and how it does it. So we wanted to compare in both length, the information score and the content and the similarity of open peer review reports versus non-open peer review reports, and also explore the influence of the gender, seniority, and geographical regions of authors on the characteristics of the peer review reports. We did this by comparing 140,000 closed, unpublished peer review reports from medical journals of Elsevier. This was 175 Elsevier journals, and 120,000 published peer review reports from Springer Nature journals, BMC journals, from around 60 medical journals. So in total, we compared 233 medical journals on their peer review practices. These were peer review reports written from 2016 to 2021, meaning before the LLM era. So we don't believe that any of these were, or they could not have been affected by peer reviewers asking for help from LLMs. And we analyzed the peer review reports using previously published models. In 2023, a Swiss team led by Anna Severin published 8 machine learning models that would classify sentences of peer review reports according to 8 categories. So what you do is you take a peer review report, you then dilute it to sentences, and then each of these sentences is run through 8 different models to classify, does the sentence relate to either materials and methods, presentation and reporting, results and discussion, importance and relevance, suggestions and solutions, does it list examples, praises, or criticisms? In total, in our sample, we had more than 6 million sentences across all of those 240,000 review reports. And around a quarter of the sentences would only be classified to belong to one of these 8 categories. More than 50% would be classified to belong to more than one category, meaning in each sentence can contain both a criticism and a suggestion, or a praise and talking about materials and methods, and around a quarter of the sentences could not be classified to belong to any of these categories. Most of those sentences that could not be classified belong to usually the introduction part of the peer review report, where it says this peer review report is regarding this topic or things like that. Or sometimes at the end of the peer review reports, some reviewers also write, I have no conflict of interests, or kind regards. There's a few other sort of end conclusion sentences that do not belong into these 8 categories. And when we just overall compared them, we saw that the open peer review reports were on average 100 words longer. Or if you look at the sentences, they had a medium of 22 sentences compared to 17 sentences on unpublished peer review reports. Just a reminder, these are all medical journals and all medical peer review reports. And when we look at the 8 categories, the largest difference we found was in the suggestions and solutions sentences, where the open peer review reports had a medium of 7 of these sentences, and the unpublished or the blind peer review reports had a medium of 4 sentences. There were some differences in others. For example, we had 1 sentence longer unpublished reports when it came to criticisms, and we had longer reports in materials and reporting. But overall, we kind of see that they were quite similar. We then summarized each of these 8 categories to produce one score, which we've called an information score, so that we could classify that each report was given one total score of the information content that it contained. And when we compared the open versus unpublished this way, we also saw that the open peer review reports had a medium of 0.52. The scores go from 0 to 1, with 1 being the maximum content a peer review report can contain. And so we saw that the open peer review reports, sort of similar to the descriptive statistics I showed before, were more informative than the unpublished peer review reports. We did then try to explore the differences based on characteristics of both the authors, and we found that women's peer review reports were on average a little bit longer, and that the Western peer reviewers had a little bit longer peer review reports as well. This could potentially be because of language differences or language proficiency. Of course, we did not explore this in any qualitative or indirect interviews, so this is just a speculation. There could be other reasons for this, but just to emphasize, all of these peer review reports were in English, and all of these were from English publishing journals. And when we compared the impact factor of journals, we have seen that there were no differences between the first and the second quartile of impact factor journals, but both the first and the second quartile were higher, had a longer and more information scores than the lower tier journals. Now, something to also emphasize is that the open peer review reports that came from the 60 journals of Springer Nature are usually, and the majority of them, belong to the 4th quartile of impact factor, or did not even have an impact factor, because a lot of these journals are still sort of new journals. So sort of to conclude is, we do find that the open peer review reports, similar to previous research, seem to be longer. They seem to be more constructive, have more suggestions for improvement, and something that I haven't mentioned, they are also more similar to each other than we have seen for unpublished peer review reports. The way we compared similarity was using the Gini index, used more common in economics to compare the wealth distribution of the world. But basically what it did is, we wanted to see how much of the 2 of the same reports for the same manuscripts are similar in the contents that they provide. The limitations of our approach, of course, this was an automated model. We did not use manual coding for this. We used previously validated models. Those models were developed by using manual codes on 2,000 sentences and then verified on other sentences. We also did not link this to what actually changed in manuscripts. So we only looked at the peer review reports themselves, or the first round of peer review reports, not of how much of those peer review suggestions or comments were actually incorporated later in peer review. And we have done this only on biomedical journals. So I think a lot of more research needs to be done to see the same things if it applies to social sciences and humanities or other things. We also want to use the same, some things that we haven't answered and that we're working on now is to actually quantify how many times do the reviewers say the same comment. So if we have 2 reviewers or 3 reviewers for the same manuscripts, we want to be able to quantify with large language models or develop machine learning models on how many raise the same issue, and when are those issues something that we would classify as really major issues or things that would drastically change things. However, our other research that you can see poster on at this conference as well has shown that only 2% of all manuscripts change during the peer review in a drastically, meaning that their primary conclusion changed. So we don't think that this would really influence a lot of our results. One of the difficulties of studying peer review, I think, as you all know, is that there are no large available databases of this. So I would like to thank very much both the Springer Nature and Elsevier who provided us with the data for this. I hope the way that Elsevier has now produced peer review workbench where any researchers can apply to study more than 18 million of their current peer review reports, or other publishers will go in the same route, that we can do more of these analyses and that we can access peer review more, that we can know what works and doesn't and how we can improve it. But I would also like to emphasize that other research that we've done has shown that every suggestion can be made differently. We can praise an author, we can make it just as a suggestion, we can critique and then say what could be changed. So a lot of language and the way that things written have been shown in previous study and qualitative studies that open peer review does, sort of knowing that it will be public, make people think of how the tone of the review report is written versus actually what is said in it. And especially today with LLM, it is much more easier to transform your comments into those that are sort of more supportive of the work and by still raising all the same issues. And we know that for many journals today, a lot of publishers are pushing towards structured peer review, and this will allow the development of AIs to help us to see which parts of the peer review reports can be actually reviewed by AIs versus which ones we need to still do as humans. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. If you have questions, please come to the mic and tell us your name and your affiliation, and we will start first.
Hi, I'm Nihar, Machine Learning and Computer Science departments at Carnegie Mellon University. Thank you for your really amazing work, as usual, Mario. So you might be happy to know that, in fact, in my field, which is AI, a majority of the top venues have open peer review. That is, they're on the open review platform and the reviews are released publicly. Now, what I want to bring up for discussion here is that some of our venues push this even further. That is, the reviews are released publicly during the review process. So when a paper gets 3 reviews, the reviews are all public, and then the broader community, anyone online can comment and so on those reviews themselves or on the paper. So I'd love to know if you've had any experiences in your analysis of that form of open peer review, or if you have any thoughts about pros and cons of it.
These, because they belong mostly to Springer Nature, and I was an editor from 2016, they are not in the same way. So these are only published when the paper is published, but the ones we had access to were the ones after the first round of review, so they wouldn't be made public. I have always supported, as you know, the open peer review because I think it's the way forward. But I think the medical community is we have always been maybe the reluctant. As you know, medRxiv is the latest one that came of all archives when it comes to all the other disciplines, maybe in some humanities parts are there. So I think it will take a little bit of time. There's always a big threat in medical world that the autism study or something like that would happen again if we don't have any pre-checks, and people are not always willing to do that. And the recent analysis by Ludo, I think maybe most of you have seen, is that while mathematics has almost 48% to 50% of all of their work being pre-printed, in medicine, it's only around 2 to 3%. And even people in this sort of room that are always forward-thinking, I would wonder what our percentage of everything that we do is pre-printed. So I think we still have to, like Anna said, there's still a bit of a cultural change that needs to happen. But I'm hoping, with this work, with the work we're showing that almost nothing changes because of peer review, another work showing that almost everything gets published, if not in this journal, then another one, that we will be moving to the full openness and,
Let's go to the second
you.
question, this Mike.
Thank you so much. Mohammed Husseini, Northwestern University. So one caveat, you mentioned that now using LLMs, people can, write better peer reviews and so on. I would like to encourage people to have a look at publishers' policies, because a lot of publishers have banned the use of large language models, even to improve your own peer review reports. The second thing is, did you check, or are you planning to check, what percentage of closed reviews include the name of the reviewer? A lot of people, myself included, when I review someone's work, I add my name at the bottom of my report, even though the journal might not be, publishing that openly. Did you have a chance to look at those instances?
I think in our sample, it was less than 10% that had their name.
Okay.
From what we've seen. But again, this is using some of the LLMs. These are, 250,000. This would need to be verified, because sometimes the name that is written is also for a reference. And
Right.
We are not yet 100% able to distinguish.
Thank you. Thank you.
This Mike.
Maria Kowalczuk, Research Integrity Manager at Frontiers. Thank you, Mario, for sharing your interesting study. I think a lot of journals recognize that it's kind of more ethical to have open reviews, but they are worried that this will add to the time to publication, because it's harder to find reviewers who would be willing, as we were saying, to share reports. So I was wondering whether you looked into that aspect in your study, for example, at the time between submission and publication, to see if it takes longer to publish in journals with open peer review?
And not in this study, we didn't have access to that information, but previous studies have shown exactly what you say. But
Thank you.
there is.
The Mike on this side of the room in the back.
Hi, James Dumlau, University of Michigan School of Information. Thank you for your presentation. I was wondering if you could confirm that the two populations are from different sets of journals and different manuscripts in those journals, and whether you checked if the groups, how comparable the groups are in terms of content, like length of the manuscript, topic.
Well, they're sort of different, because one comes from mostly Elsevier journals, the other ones come from Springer Nature journals. So there are, at least publisher differences. One operates on open peer review, the other one's on mostly single blind or double blind peer reviews. But in terms of topics, they were very similar. So these are all of the medical journals from both publishers. So they are, quite overlapping. The only difference, again, what I mentioned before, is most of the open peer reviews are currently lower indexed, meaning lower impact factors. But aside from that, we didn't find differences in both the length of the manuscripts or anything else.
Thank you.
Question from this one.
Markus Krivars, Helsinki, Finland. Thank you. Very nice presentation. So this is maybe a bit provocative, but I'll ask it anyway. Did you think about the issue of sort of consent? I mean, if I'm a peer reviewer and I give my review to this journal, do I automatically give the authority for the publisher to use my review then in studies, for example, like this? And I guess because I'm involved very much in patient research, and there these things are, of course, extremely sensitive. I'm sure you thought about it, but I think it's philosophically very interesting. For example, what if somebody now finds out that I review, give negative reviews to, Germans, for example, and this somehow comes out, and, my German colleagues won't be. Is this sort of part of the, when you submit a review that okay, there's my review, do whatever you want with it. It's not, you have, the publisher has the total right of what I've written.
So I think for open peer reviews, we don't have those questions because they allow them to be open. For the closed ones, it's always in the little letters that we don't read. But what's also interesting coming from your questions is the thing that happens in the future. If you remember all the wills that were released for people that wrote them in the 18th century that never had intentions to do that, I think humanity moves on for things. So I'm not justifying one way or the other, but in the small letters of the Elsevier, it usually says that this will be used for improvement of the processes. These are not published, will not be published, so there are sort of restrictions of what we do with them, but it is definitely something to consider in how we want to be used, especially if we analyze them. Some of our research projects looked at offensive comments, like you say, and some other things where, issues may arise if we look into them. And I think this is you know, maybe some data leaks happen as well in the future for many of these things, and then we may be even more in trouble. And I think this is where countries and us as a community need to have protective mechanisms.
We have time for 2 more questions, so we'll take the front mic and the back mic.
Steve Finn, University of Washington, and Chairman Network Open. Many journals ask their editors to rate the quality of the reviews. Did you have access to information? And if so, was there a difference in the quality ratings of the reviews?
We had only sporadical access, so we couldn't use it because it was too few and not really usable. A lot of the systems, as you know, submission systems were not built to export these large corpuses of data. It took years for some of this data to be even released to us, and that's where the systems often fail. Even if sometimes they exist, they were not always given to us. So for this research, no.
Hi, sorry, Randy Ellis, biomedical informatics at Harvard Medical School. A really fantastic talk. I'm wondering if you found any differences in the reviewer reports between papers that were published versus not published, because this is pertinent right now because in June, Nature announced that they're going to publish referee reports and author responses, but only for papers that are published. And so a lot of people are worried, I think correctly, about the impact of survivorship bias on what kind of image this presents to the community.
Again, due to difficulties of the data, these were not linked to whether it was published or not. So I couldn't even give you a percentage of how many of these were published. Based on the previous research, around 55% across all journals gets published. But these were first round reviews of everything that was sent to peer review. So that's as far as I can tell you for this.
Thank you.